They always told us Walt Disney was a dreamer, a man who wanted to bring joy to children and families through magical worlds and unforgettable characters. That's the story they sold us. But behind the glossy image of Mickey Mouse and the shimmering lights of Disneyland, there's another story, one most people don't dare to talk about. According to Pentagon files I had the chance to read, Disney wasn't just a storyteller. He was a collaborator. During World War II, Walt worked closely with the U.S. government to produce films that weren't about magic, but about propaganda. These animated shorts shaped the way Americans thought about war, enemies, and even patriotism itself. The Pentagon saw Disney not just as an artist, but as a powerful tool, a man who could weave narratives that enter the minds of millions without resistance. If a soldier tells you something, you might question it. But if Mickey Mouse tells you, that gets under your skin. That was the first time I realized that the happiest place on earth might have been built on secrets no one wanted the world to see. The documents I uncovered go further. They suggest that Disney's relationship with the government didn't end after the war. On the contrary, it deepened. Some insiders whisper that Walt was approached for projects involving early forms of psychological influence. Imagine this. While people believed they were watching harmless cartoons, subtle messages were being planted in their subconscious. Was it patriotism? Was it obedience? Or was it something darker? One file hinted at experiments tied to what later became MKUltra, the CIA's mind control program. The idea was simple: hide influence in plain sight, disguised as entertainment. And Walt Disney, whether knowingly or unknowingly, became part of that machinery. The man we all saw as a smiling figure with a pencil in hand was, perhaps, far more connected to the shadow networks of power than we ever imagined. Of course, the most controversial file I read involved something many of you might have heard whispered in rumors: the cryogenic freezing of Walt Disney himself. The official story says he died in 1966 and was cremated. But why, then, did I see restricted documents suggesting his body, or at least part of it, was preserved in a highly controlled facility? The paper spoke of experiments in life extension, funded by black budgets hidden deep within Pentagon projects. If that's true, Walt Disney wasn't just a man of imagination. He was a man obsessed with immortality. Think about it. A man who created timeless worlds, characters that never age. Did he try to become eternal himself? And if so, why was the Pentagon involved? What could they gain from keeping Disney alive, even in some suspended state? Then there's the matter of Disneyland itself. Everyone knows it as the ultimate playground, a kingdom of happiness. But some of the files I reviewed painted it in a different light. The park, especially in its early days, was designed with areas that had hidden purposes: surveillance technologies, crowd behavior studies, even layout designs meant to guide human movement in specific ways. These were all detailed in military-style reports. One theory suggests Disneyland was not just for fun, but was also a controlled environment for studying how masses of people react to carefully engineered spaces. When I read that, chills went down my spine. Because suddenly, Disneyland wasn't just a theme park. It was a living experiment, a place where psychology, government interests, and fantasy collided. And all of it was hidden behind the smiling face of a man the world thought it knew. One of the most disturbing revelations I found was about Disney's fascination with underground spaces. While the public admired Cinderella's castle and the colorful rides above ground, the true innovation lay beneath the surface. The Pentagon documents described a labyrinth of tunnels and hidden facilities beneath Disneyland. Officially, they were explained as utility corridors, designed so employees could move unseen. But classified reports suggested something more: experiments in crowd dispersal, secret observation posts, and even access tunnels for government personnel. The files hinted that these underground networks were used during the Cold War as a testbed for evacuation drills and psychological experiments. Imagine thousands of families enjoying a parade above, while beneath their feet, officials studied how crowds reacted to stress, panic, and control manipulation. Disneyland wasn't just a park. It was a lab, and the guests were subjects. And then there's Epcot, Walt Disney's experimental prototype community of tomorrow. To the public, it was sold as a utopian vision, a futuristic city where technology and innovation would make life perfect. But buried in the documents, Epcot looked like something else entirely. Some Pentagon notes suggested Epcot was envisioned as a control community, a real-world simulation where surveillance and social engineering could be tested on actual citizens. Walt's obsession with perfection aligned too closely with the military's interest in control. Was Epcot a dream, or was it a prototype for a society where every move, every purchase, every word could be monitored? When I read those files, I realized the cheerful marketing hid something much darker. Disney wasn't just dreaming about the future. He was building it brick by brick with the Pentagon's silent blessing. But the secrets didn't stop at the parks. The files also linked Disney Studios to defense projects. Imagine walking into a Disney animation building in the 1950s, expecting to see animators sketching Donald Duck or Goofy. Now imagine stepping into a back room where classified military films were being produced. According to the records, Disney lent its studios resources to the government for projects involving training videos, weapon simulations, and psychological warfare techniques. In one document, there was even mention of experimental animations designed to induce fear, confusion, or loyalty in the human mind. Entertainment and defense became blurred, and Walt Disney was at the center of that overlap. It makes you wonder, how many of the cartoons we grew up watching carried more than just laughter and fun? And what about Walt Disney himself? The Pentagon files painted a picture of a man far more complicated than the public image suggested. The charismatic smile, the reassuring voice, it was all there. But behind closed doors, Walt was described as someone obsessed with legacy, with influence, and with leaving behind something greater than himself. The documents hinted at secret meetings with government officials, private discussions about technology, even speculation about human behavior on a massive scale. The happiest place on Earth, it seems, was always connected to the most serious experiments in control, psychology, and influence. If even half of what I read is true, then Walt Disney wasn't just a dreamer. He was an architect of something far bigger, something we're only beginning to uncover. And that's why, even decades after his death, his name is still tied to mysteries the world doesn't want us to solve. The most unsettling part of the documents was how Disney's influence reached beyond the parks and films. There were memos describing how Disneyland itself had been used as a meeting point for intelligence operatives. The cheerful setting provided the perfect cover. Agents could exchange information in plain sight, blending in with families, tourists, and crowds. One file even mentioned a code phrase, "Me at the castle." It was almost laughable until I realized the implications. Intelligence agencies had turned Disney's kingdom into a playground for espionage. Imagine two spies standing by the teacup ride, trading state secrets while children spun in circles just a few feet away. The Pentagon viewed this as one of Disney's greatest assets. The ability to create a world so perfect, so innocent, that nobody would ever suspect it was being used as a front for something else entirely. And then there was Walt's fascination with cryonics. Officially, Disney's death in 1966 was explained like anyone else's, lung cancer, followed by a private funeral. But the Pentagon files suggested something far stranger. Buried in classified notes were discussions of experiments in human preservation, with Disney's name directly attached. Some reports claimed he funded early cryogenic studies, and that his body, or at least parts of it, were preserved in secret facilities. The documents speculated on continuity of genius programs, where the government sought to keep influential figures alive for future consultation. Was Disney really frozen beneath Disneyland, as the urban legend says? The Pentagon records didn't confirm it, but the number of references was too high to ignore. Maybe he isn't just a legend after all. Maybe he's still waiting. But the files didn't stop at Walt himself. They also included detailed observations on the psychological power of Disney's creations. Pentagon analysts studied how animated films could instill values, shape national identity, and even subtly prepare populations for war. They examined emotional manipulation of music, the careful design of characters, the hero and villain dichotomy that could be applied to geopolitics. In some reports, they even linked specific Disney movies to propaganda efforts during World War II and the Cold War. Bambi, teaching empathy, Peter Pan, fueling youthful rebellion, Snow White, reinforcing morality tales. All had layers. What children thought were fairy tales, the Pentagon saw as tools for conditioning. Entertainment wasn't just fun anymore. It was a weapon, carefully disguised as magic. And that brings us to the most dangerous secret of all, the concept of engineered nostalgia. The files describe how Disney understood that if you could shape someone's childhood, you could control their adulthood. The parks, the films, the merchandise, they weren't just products. They were anchors designed to tie people's emotions to a brand, to an idea, even to a worldview. The Pentagon recognized the power in this. If you could make millions of people feel safe, happy, and loyal through a shared cultural experience, you could guide entire generations without them realizing it. Disneyland was never just a park. It was a prototype for mass emotional engineering. And Disney was not just a showman. He was a strategist in a game far larger than any fairy tale. The deeper I went, the more disturbing the files became. There were references to the Florida Project, which most people know as a code name for Walt Disney World during its development. But in the Pentagon's files, that project had a different meaning. They weren't just studying how to build a theme park. They were studying how to build a self-contained society, where surveillance and control could be perfected without resistance. Hidden beneath the smiling mascots and fireworks, the infrastructure allowed for extensive monitoring. Sensors, cameras, and even crowd management algorithms were tested there before being quietly adapted for national security purposes. In other words, Disney's happiest place on earth wasn't just entertainment. It was a controlled experiment where people unknowingly participated in studies that would later shape surveillance policies across the country. What unsettled me most were the records of classified collaborations between Disney executives and military think tanks. The documents revealed discussions about perception management. Imagine, the Pentagon asked Disney to help craft narratives that could soften the public's reaction to controversial government actions. For instance, during the height of the Cold War, animated shorts with subtle anti-Soviet undertones were produced under the guise of children's entertainment. During the Vietnam era, discussions about how to influence public sentiment through Disney's global reach appeared in black and white memos. The strategy was clear. If you could use beloved characters to represent American ideals, people would accept political messages without questioning them. Disney magic wasn't just about fantasy. It was a tool for psychological warfare, one that blended perfectly with national interests. Even darker were the files linking Disney's research into subliminal messaging. I found notes describing experiments where single frames were spliced into films, so quick that the conscious mind couldn't register them, but the subconscious absorbed the images. According to the documents, early tests were done in Disneyland theaters, where unsuspecting guests were shown experimental reels. These subliminal cues weren't just about selling popcorn. They tested emotional triggers, obedience, even political attitudes. The Pentagon considered these findings promising, suggesting they could be weaponized in propaganda campaigns. It hit me like a cold wave. Millions of families had walked into Disney parks to escape reality, but in some cases, they were stepping into laboratories designed to test how much the human mind could be shaped without ever realizing it. And then, The strangest entry of all references to a hidden vault beneath Disney's corporate headquarters in Burbank. The documents described as a repository for classified cultural materials. What did that mean? Some files hinted at unreleased films containing controversial imagery. Others mentioned experimental technologies for immersive media decades ahead of their time. One chilling note simply said, "Disney holds the keys to worlds we are not ready to see." I couldn't shake the idea that Disney's empire was more than just imagination. It was a bridge between art, psychology, and covert operations. Was Walt himself aware of the full extent, or had the Pentagon taken his creations and twisted them into something unrecognizable? Either way, the truth was far from the fairy tale the public believed. I couldn't ignore the recurring mention of MKUltra auxiliaries within the Disney files. For years, conspiracy theorists had whispered about a connection, but here it was in black ink. Documents suggested that certain Imagineering projects were studied as potential platforms for psychological conditioning. Rides that manipulated light, sound, and vibration weren't just creative or fun. They were carefully analyzed by Pentagon psychologists for their ability to disorient or heighten suggestibility. Think about the classic It's a Small World ride. Repetitive music, looping imagery, smiling faces. On the surface, it's harmless, childlike even, but in the files, it was described as a testbed for repetitive auditory exposure, designed to see how long the human brain could be kept in a passive state before resisting. It wasn't proof of mind control, but it was chilling evidence of how entertainment and psychology blurred together. The military wasn't just interested in rides. They wanted to understand how Disney built environments of total immersion. That phrase appeared repeatedly in classified memos. By engineering spaces where people willingly suspend disbelief, Disney created something the Pentagon had never been able to achieve through force: voluntary compliance. When you walk through the gates, you hand over money, follow the rules, and allow yourself to be directed, all while smiling. Pentagon strategists studied this phenomenon and asked, could nations be governed the same way? Could you design cities, media, even schools that function like Disney parks, where freedom is illusion, but no one notices because they're entertained? That idea, I realized, was far more dangerous than any weapon. Control without chains, manipulation without resistance. And then the files turned cryptic. One folder referenced the Hidden Kingdom, a phrase I'd never heard before. The note suggested that Disney parks were part of a larger symbolic design, mapping out something deeper, a kind of cultural architecture. Some researchers inside the Pentagon believed the parks were modern temples, places where ritual and myth were packaged as family fun. Even the layouts of the parks, according to one analysis, followed patterns linked to ancient geometry and esoteric symbolism. Was it intentional, or just an interpretation imposed afterward? The files didn't say. But the fact that government analysts spent time decoding Disney maps as if they were sacred blueprints left me uneasy. It meant they weren't just looking at cartoons. They believed Disney was shaping culture at a near-religious level. The last page I found was marked Eyes Only. It contained a single warning. Public exposure would destabilize trust in cultural institutions. That line still echoes in my mind. What they feared wasn't that people would stop going to Disney parks, but that they would stop believing in the innocence of entertainment itself. And maybe that's the real secret. The Pentagon learned that the most powerful form of control doesn't come from weapons or surveillance, but from stories. Stories that make us laugh, cry, and dream, while quietly guiding how we see the world. As I closed the file, I realized a harsh truth. Disney wasn't just about fantasy. It was a mirror reflecting the Pentagon's deepest desire, to shape reality itself. And once you see that, you can never walk into those parks the same way again.